2019 was a pretty massive year for me for a number of reasons. One of the more positive being that I was involved in the Fight for the Bite campaign. The Fight for the Bite campaign was protesting against Norwegian energy company Equinor from drilling in the Great Australian Bight, drilling for oil. It was such an amazing thing to be a part of. One of the biggest criticisms of these paddle outs was that we were being hypocrites because we were using surfboards and wetsuits that were made out of fossil fuels while protesting a new fossil fuel project. Activists are hypocrites. Let's talk about that. We're going to break this into two main sections and then lots of little sections under that because I love categorizing and breaking things down and that kind of thing. Anyway, the two main sections are we're going to be talking about hypocrisy, and then the extension we're going to be talking about the things that we can do to be less hypocritical and also realise that hypocrisy is necessary to some extent. Under the debate section I have two subsections. The first is talking about criticising the system while still being within it. And the second is that we do have some choice, but in the words of Ali Hamilton, it's not that simple. We don't have a choice of the systems we're born into. In Australia, we live in a constitutional monarchy, we have a representative democracy, and we have a capitalist economic system. We have different systems within that, the welfare system, education system, healthcare systems, we have rules, regulations, legislation, all these sort of things that literally govern, that's why it's called the government, that literally govern our everyday lives. And for us to survive and meet our needs, we have to comply to these systems. And I believe that it's ridiculous to say that we can't criticise the systems that we're born into because we don't have a choice of the systems we're born into. What about the things we do have a choice to be a part of? This is what the people who criticise the paddle outs for being hypocritical are talking about. That brings us to the second part of the debate section, which is that we do have some choice, but it's not that simple. If you're of the belief that we should be at full ethical capacity, that all of our choices, all of the things that we can choose to participate in, should 100% perfectly align with our values, whether that's sustainability or otherwise. If you're of that belief, I disagree with you for three reasons. The first reason is I'll call theory versus practice. The second reason is Maslow and needs. And the third reason is that perfection is the enemy of the good. Reason 1, theory versus practice. As someone with a great love of science, I would like to take a look into a cute little concept called theoretical versus actual yield. Please don't click away if you're not into science because I'm going to give a simplified explanation and the concept isn't really that complicated anyway. I'm wearing this lab coat because I spent $80 on it and only got to use it for 2 classes, so... Okay, theoretical versus actual yield. So if we look at a chemical reaction, I'll give a very simplified, basic, representative example. We've got 2 things that we're putting together to make one thing. That's the chemical reaction, okay? The theoretical yield is how much stuff we're going to get on the other side based on a calculation, based on the maths. So for example, if we've got 5 grams of this, 5 grams of this, put them together to make one thing, we're going to have 10 grams of this, theoretically. Actual yield is the amount of stuff that you get in real life, in practice. For example, in this reaction, we put 5 grams of this, 5 grams of this, and we get 9.999 grams of this. We've lost a little bit. Basically, that was quite a long-winded analogy to say that we can speak theoretically as much as we want, but it's just not going to translate into real life. And we're talking about humans here. Humans are far more flawed and complicated than chemicals are. Reason 2, Maslow and needs. While surfing isn't a category in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, although I'm sure many people would disagree with him on that, and we're just using surfing as an example here for a bigger picture discussion, surfing does meet needs in different ways. Biological needs is health, fitness, mental health. Belongingness, there's surfing communities. You can get a sense of belongingness out of that activity. Esteem, there's achievement involved when you get better and better at the skill, or even if you compete in surfing. And self-actualization drivers, such as it being a challenge, For some people it's a new experience, the appreciation of our oceans and nature. Okay, so hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that surfing does meet essential needs. But is surfing essential for your needs to be met? No. You can meet these needs in other ways, and arguably some other more sustainable ways. However, this is where we start to get into rocky territory, because there are so many more variables to consider. For example, what other activities are there to meet these needs? And are those activities more sustainable? Yes, sometimes. Less sustainable? Yes, often. And how well do these activities meet each individual's needs? Different activities, it differs with every individual. It's highly dependent on the individual's personality, experiences, access and privilege, and so many more variables. So it's a lot more complicated than saying you don't need surfing to meet those needs, find something else, because that something else is a challenge to find. Because there are so many variables that go into whether this other thing is better or worse for sustainability and better or worse at meeting an individual's needs. I like to use exaggerations, hyperboles and hypotheticals to the extreme, so then we can learn lessons from these at the less extreme. So I'll give you the example. If we were to live as sustainably as possible in the current system while meeting our basic needs, biological needs and safety needs, you'd have to be off-grid. You couldn't use even renewable energy because it takes fossil fuels to transport solar panels or wind turbines. You would have to grow your own food, make your own clothes, build your own shelter, and it'd be a very simple, minimalistic life, which would suit some people, I'm sure, but not most. Like I've already said, this is an extreme example, and I don't think this is what anyone expects of others. However, what I believe this extreme can teach us is that the needs of esteem and self-actualization would be very difficult to meet in a perfectly sustainable lifestyle. So I believe it's reasonable to say that in order to meet our needs, we have to act unsustainably in some ways. Ironically, sustainable means the ability to sustain. If we're looking at just environmental sustainability, which is what most people think of it as, then sure, that the lifestyle of off-grid, growing your own stuff, making your own things and being disconnected from society, that's environmental sustainability. But if we're looking at sustainability in terms of individuals being able to sustain a lifestyle, people can't sustain that extreme that I've given. From that extreme, hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that there are some ways that we must act unsustainably to meet our needs at this point in time within this current system. This brings me to reason 3, which is perfection is the enemy of the good. I'm not the first person to say that, but that's just to clarify. If we put such high expectations on people and don't accept anything other than perfect, we'll achieve nothing. Again, other people have said this before me, but we don't need a handful of perfect environmentalists. We need a world of imperfect environmentalists. People won't start to change, people won't make small incremental improvements if we put this pressure on others to be perfect or nothing, because people will always choose the latter, because perfect is impossible. If we take the paddle out example, we really focused on ensuring that these paddle outs were family friendly, they were promoted to people who just loved the beach. You didn't have to be some radical activist to attend these paddle outs. They were supposed to be very inclusive to different kinds of people. And because of this, these paddle outs were a first for a lot of people. They were a first protest, first environmental protest, and an introduction into environmental activism, and maybe activism in general. If we were to shun anyone who didn't buy their boards secondhand, didn't buy their wetsuit from a sustainable place, even though they're more expensive and not accessible to everyone, if we shunned people who have bought products in plastic before, who don't have solar panels on their house, who drove their car that uses petrol to get to the paddle outs, then we'd hardly have anyone, if anyone at all, attending these paddle out events, and we would have achieved nothing. What I'm trying to say is that, yeah, paddle outs, people were hypocrites, people who bought new surfboards, new wetsuits. Hypocrites, right? While that is hypocritical, we can't make change, we can't make positive change without being hypocritical. Hypocrisy isn't necessarily a terrible thing. If we sat with the current system, the current practices, exactly what's happening right now, and we said we agree with it all, then we would not be a hypocrite. But we'd also be doing nothing good. We wouldn't be making change, we wouldn't be improving the world, progressing society for the better. So being a hypocrite is kind of essential if you want to make change. However, we do want to be less and less hypocritical every day, making sure that we are increasingly making our actions align with what we care about, what our values are. And that's where I bring us to section 2, which is the extension. How do we apply this to our individual lives? How do we live more sustainably? Number 1, and I said this in my first video and I'll say it in a million videos to come, you have to write down your values. Write down your values, work out your values and reevaluate them all the time. Maybe yearly, something like that, whatever works for you. Because how can you even know if you're being a hypocrite if you don't even know what you care about? We do things every day, like including myself, who I know my values very well and I try and make my actions align with my values. I'm very conscious of that. But I still do things every day that mismatch, that don't align. Like the other day, I purchased some whiteboard markers because I needed some whiteboard markers. And I don't know who made them, where they came from. And I've looked into more sustainable choices for the future. I needed those whiteboard markers that night, but I chose convenience and my needs over, they were made with plastic, so I chose that over the environment, and I chose that over potentially supporting things like sweatshops. Have you bought something if you bought a t-shirt for $1, can you guarantee that that t-shirt wasn't made through child labour or...
I love buying clothes from Shein because it's so cheap. And there's something about being able to feel that the clothes were made by child hands that's just so comforting.
Can you guarantee that the company making that shirt are not a massive contributor to the climate emergency or are polluting our earth? Can you guarantee any of that? I doubt it. I assume that you care about those things. I assume that you care about the climate emergency, but we act in ways that don't match this. And so what we've got to do is we've got to be conscious, we've got to be intentional and aware and educated on the things that we care about, our priorities. Do you prioritize your convenience and ease over the environment? You can buy those smaller yogurt tubs instead of a bigger one, you know? That's if you prioritize your convenience over the environment. But I don't think most people do. Yet, we still do these things because there's an easy disconnect between things that are happening here and now and the impact, the long-term and sort of extended impact that our actions have. And I understand that. I 100% understand that, and I do that. I'm guilty of that too. But we can't improve until we're aware of what we need to improve on. Awareness, just be aware, know your values and know what your priorities are. How do we act more sustainably? Environmental sustainability. I'll give you a few tips. Number 1, reduce. Use what you already have, reuse what you have where you can, and then reduce the amount of stuff you bring in, the amount of stuff you purchase or contribute to. Reduce it, and then the stuff that you do need or want to consume, swap it for something more sustainable. Reduce and swap. Use what you have. Even if I've got a lot of zero waste pictures are beautiful and they've got these nice matching mason jars and that kind of thing, but that's not very environmentally sustainable if those jars are all bought new and matching. I've got a cupboard full of Pringle tins I've got rice and pasta and beans in those Pringle tins, and it looks bloody ugly, but that's far more sustainable than making a pretty cupboard. Number 1, reduce, use what you have, reuse what you have, reduce the amount you consume, and then the stuff you do consume, swap it for something more sustainable where you can. And if you can't, because there's so many issues around cost and access, I really want to be inclusive, and that's why it's about you determining your values and your abilities and your priorities. Okay, so that's hypocrisy for you. I'm running out of light, I'm running out of battery, but I hope this video made sense. I hope that the yield analogy didn't make it more confusing. Hopefully that was helpful. But I'd love to hear what you think. Please, if you're seeing this on social media, write this on social media or on YouTube, please put a comment. This is a discussion more than a, final say. I want to hear what you guys think, because obviously I think if we're not hypocrites, we can't change the system. And if we identify our values and identify where we're being a hypocrite, we can be less and less hypocritical every day, and I believe that's one of the most sustainable things we can do. The response on my last video was really great on Facebook, people writing comments and supporting and sharing, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, because yeah, I was pretty terrified to post that video, but it has really motivated me to make this second one, and about things that I care about, I really care about. So thank you.